Hey gang, I'm Nikki LaCroce, and you're listening to Who the Fuck. And on today's episode, I'm sharing the mic with Jen Berlingo. And Jen is a midlife coach, licensed professional counselor, nationally registered art therapist, master level Reiki practitioner, and the author of Midlife Emergence, a beautifully written memoir that Jen was inspired to write as she stepped fully into her queer identity and as a companion for other women traversing their midlife journeys. Welcome to the show, Jen.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we've chatted a little bit before, but really mostly in a group setting. And one of the things that I love about the group that we met through is that it's a variety of people of various queer identities who are really out there right now sharing their stories either on this side of the mic or that side or both. And
Right.
many have written books and created, communities around your stories. And the thing that I really find so inspiring about your story is how unbelievably authentic it is. In a lot of ways, when I was listening to it, I'm an audiobook person. It's
Me
much
too.
easier for me to process. So I really appreciate that you read it yourself. And I think it just really spoke to me on such a visceral human level because your vulnerability is really there, but you weave in a really good sense of your personality as well. And one of the ways that you do that is right from the get, you share that you are sort of reframing the idea of a midlife crisis into a midlife emergence. So, can you share a little bit about why that's important to acknowledge?
Sure, totally. Yeah, for me, my midlife, well, psychologically is a period between ages like 40 and 65 or like early 60s. And the stereotypical midlife crisis historically more centers like the male experience. And it's, the red sports car and all of those things that we hear about. But I feel like it doesn't need to be a crisis or an emergency. It can be more of an emergence. And I love that word because it's defined as the process of coming into view or becoming exposed after being previously concealed, which felt really true to me and the way that, the entrance into midlife unfolded, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. But I just really just feel like this is an opportunity to emerge more as our authentic selves and have the courage to like challenge or change or shed some of the conditioning that we may have played into or accepted and lived in the first act of life to really soulfully architect the second act the way we want it to be.
Yeah, the way you just said that is such a good representation of the way that you write, Jen. Um, you have a way of creating a very visual and emotional narrative around your story. And
Thank
one of the things I think just emergence in general has sort of a visual to it, right? Like
you. Right.
you're coming out of your shell, you're creating something. It's bigger than you are almost in a
Mm-hmm.
way. And so one of the things that when I was preparing for this conversation, like I was trying to figure out how do I say this in a way that it's a memoir, but also sort of you have include exercises in the book
Yes.
effectively, and you do it in a variety of ways. So you ask people
Yeah.
to write and process things in different manners. And so you had written that it's known as a teaching memoir. And I was like, great, there's a name for it.
Right.
So now I don't have to figure that out.
Totally.
And I think that that's such a great way of putting your story together too, because you do it in a way that gives people perspective with and you invite them into this idea of self-inquiry. And it's funny because I'd never heard the term really self-inquiry until this.
Mm-hmm.
And I do consume a lot of like self-help, introspective type content. And so I was
Yeah.
fascinated that not only did I hear this in your book yesterday, but as I was editing the podcast that's going out today, some the guest said something about self-inquiry. And I thought, okay, have I just been like kind of missing the boat on this?
No, it's just another way of saying that, personal
And
exploration.
yeah, but I love it because the way you do it in your book, you say I invite you. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's done in a way that is gentle and kind and compassionate. Do you feel like that was something that was really intentional for you, not just on a personal level, but also because of what you do for your occupation as somebody who's in the realm of therapy?
Yes. Well, it was very intentional to make it a teaching memoir in the sense that the two types of books I like to read as a reader are memoir and personal growth books. I'm, a nonfiction consumer, I guess.
I
And
am too.
so
I
I
get that.
wanted to, yeah, I just wanted to weave that together because I feel like memoir is naturally instructive. Like even when we read straight up memoir, it tends to feel healing when we hear our story somehow reflected in the voice of another person and it resonates. And especially around things that might have felt shameful or hidden, shining a light on those can be really healing. So I wanted to do that, but then it felt natural to me, having been a psychotherapist for the past 20 years and an art therapist and doing energy work, to really weave in some of the teaching pieces, the didactic pieces around like attachment theory and different things like that in a accessible way, like through my own story. And then in the self inquiry parts at the end of each of the 13 chapters, I wanted it to feel like an invitation in the sense that I know that, we all learn in a variety of ways. So I really wanted to provide like a buffet of options. Not everyone's going to be a journaler. Not everyone's going to want to make, visual art about it. Not everyone's going to do a personal ritual or ceremony, but I have these different ways of relating. It's like just different languages. And that's why I pose it more as an invitation because it's not like, yeah, some people may have picked up the book just to read a story, but they can get that extra nugget out of it and see which part speaks to them. And it might be something they never tried before and can get a lot out of. So I just felt like it would engage, different types of people in different ways. So yeah, that was definitely intentional.
Yeah, well, I like the way that you said it too, sort of giving this buffet of options because we do all learn differently, and that's super important. I was actually just talking about this with my wife last night on a completely
Mm-hmm.
unrelated subject about how we learn so differently and the way that we
Mm-hmm.
process information varies so much. And it can vary so much, not just from person to person, but within ourselves at a given moment in
Yeah.
time. And one of the things, because I was listening to this and I knew that I even said last night, I was like, I want to come back to this and go through each of the exercises. I did a couple of them in the moment, but I was also listening while I was doing like
Yeah.
random things around the house. And so I found myself rewinding and being like, no, wait, what'd she say? I need to go back to that, And so
Yeah.
it was so engaging and done in a way, Jen, where I also felt like you it's not fully linear, but the way that you
Right.
bring it together, I think really showcases the value of sharing the context of your earlier life, when you were younger, the way that you grew up, the relationships that you've been in, and then kind of coming back to those moments as you've gone through this emergence and revisiting
Right.
your feelings on that. What was it like for you as you were either writing the book or reading the book for the audiobook and
Mm.
and processing those moments for yourself again, because there's one part of being an author, especially if it's a memoir, where you're putting the book together, you're trying to make the cohesive story, but after you've written it, it's published, it's out there, and you're revisiting it. Is that kind of like a whole other catharsis that you go through?
Totally. Yes. It felt like the whole time I was writing the book, that was cathartic in itself and healing and therapeutic for me. But I didn't know if it would just live in my computer or if I would publish it. It was like, can I actually say these things publicly? Like, can I
Yes,
do
and they're
this? And I
great.
thank you. And some of the feedback I've gotten is like, oh, it's like you let us read your diary. And I'm like, oh, shit. But also, that was my intention because I really want to be a stand for exposing and being visible in the mess of transformation, and that we don't have to have it all tidy and perfect and like I was this and now I'm this, ta-da, butterfly. Like that's not how change looks, and I feel like it looks like that on social media and just the way that a lot of things are structured now. And I I wanted to show like the mess of it, and so it's like, okay, I'm glad. It sounds like reading my diary, but it does feel really vulnerable. Had a lot of anxiety around it since the book was published in April 2023. Just like, oh, it's out there and hearing other people read it. And I've gotten really amazing, beautiful feedback that has confirmed why I wrote it, for sure. And it's also another pass at revisiting my own story from an outside perspective. I feel like it's once it was published, it was no longer just mine, but I knew that it was something that other people would relate their own story to or project upon, or, there were ways in which I might be misunderstood or my words might be different because a person needs to find themselves in it. So just like any piece of art, being a visual artist as well, it's like once I paint something and go hang it, in a gallery here in Boulder or something, someone else has a different relationship to it that I have nothing to do with. So there's this letting go process that feels really similar to parenting. Honestly, I have a 16-year-old, so it's like a constant process of letting go. Yeah, and then yeah, the idea of revisiting, gosh, childhood stuff and making it nonlinear. I just feel like this transformation process isn't linear, and I didn't want my book to feel like 13 steps to like, getting through a midlife transition. Like that isn't what it's like. It's just, I
Yeah.
wish I could write that book, or that exists, but it's going to be different for everyone. So I tried to just find 13 themes or things that may come up, and they may come up in different order, but part of it really is excavating some of these earlier parts of life because of the messages that we swallowed, the interjects that come, the messages from the outside world that kind of we start to hear as our own voice later on because they're so ingrained. Um, this midlife passage is a time to question some of that. It's another individuation process, which is the word that Carl Jung used, like for separating from, primary caregivers, our first pass at it, as teenagers, that's what we're doing. And then the second pass at it in midlife is separating from the social, cultural, familial norms that we've, you know, taken in, and then trying to figure out in that, where am I? Like, what is my authentic self? What is my core self? And orienting to that, and maybe molting out of some of those layers of identity that aren't completely authentic. So in doing that, it does require some degree of looking back and seeing maybe where those messages came from and how they've been serving, and honoring that they've been
Yeah.
serving, and then seeing which ones maybe don't need to be there any longer or don't fit for us anymore. So
Yeah. I think one of the things that makes your memoir so memorable is the fact that you are a licensed counselor, an art therapist, and the way that you show up in the book vulnerably, but also with practical, um, like just even referencing Carl Jung, right? I love the concept of integration and understanding who we are. And the challenges of that are very palpable. Actually, before I go down this path, I want to quote something that you said because this relates to that. So at one point in your book, you make a reference to like the fear of not being loved. And I'm paraphrasing here, so forgive me, but I wrote
sure,
it as quickly as I could.
no problem.
You had a fear of being loved despite repeatedly seeing evidence of being loved, welcomed, and accepted more fully when we are our most soft, unguarded, and unmasked selves. And that line spoke to me so much, Jen, because when I was first going to therapy, I remember my therapist saying something along the lines of like, when you are your most authentic self, you will magnetize people.
Yeah.
And I've probably said this on previous episodes where I've said I really took it as like a general statement in the moment. And
Mm-hmm.
as I progressed, realized that she was really speaking directly to me about things that I was sharing with her and how I was trying to find that part of myself, or those share those parts of myself, feel comfortable sharing
Yeah.
those parts of myself. And so when I think about like what you've done to create this dynamic in the book and share these parts of yourself, we think about the fact that we can look back at our lives and have that shame, have that guilt. For me, a lot of it's shame slash embarrassment, feeling
Mm-hmm.
of non-belonging. And I said something about, recognition of why I accepted so little in my first marriage and biggest adult relationship of my life up until now. And recognizing that a lot of that came from fear of abandonment, fear of rejection from being in seventh grade, having a group of girlfriends no longer want to be friends with me because they thought I was a lesbian. I was not out. And so that like drove me really hard into like, okay, well, no, I'm going to date guys. I feel like this is kind of part
Mm-hmm.
of your book too, where you're like, I'm going to follow
Right.
the path. I'm going to do the thing that
Right.
people think I should be doing. And,
Mm-hmm.
um, revisiting that in therapy now and being like kind of ashamed of it and frustrated with myself. And my
Yeah.
therapist saying to me, but those are the years of your life that you most desperately are seeking belonging. You
Right.
faced this rejection and your brain wasn't fully developed. And she really
Right.
emphasized that part. And I was like, the part that for me gave me the most grace was your brain didn't get it yet, like you
No,
weren't
right.
there. And so that idea of like integration and self-actualization is something that I feel like everybody should be taught. Like I feel like that
Totally.
should be common knowledge because
Yeah,
it would make it so much easier to forgive ourselves for the shit that we do or the things that we think or the way that we behave when we're younger and we aren't fully formed. And like
right.
instead we just carry so much of it with us. And I feel like your book really gives readers, listeners, a chance to step back and evaluate those parts of ourselves through the lens of your own story, in addition to the exercises you provide. But
Right.
for you at the point of your emergence, do you feel like it was sort of, if you don't do it now, you're not going to do it?
Oh, totally. Yeah, there was definitely a sense of urgency. I think that comes with not just age, but honestly, like I had always known I was queer, and I didn't even have like the language for it as a teenager, really beyond, living in Southeastern United States, growing up in the 70s, 80s. I didn't have models of queer relationships that were healthy. And really the only thing I heard about that was like slurs, but I also knew how I felt. But it was
Right.
like, okay, there's no path for that there. And so, yeah, I did the thing that I was taught to do, and I dated boys, and then I dated men, and then I married a man. And I mean, he's wonderful. We're best friends, but yeah, it's not, it wasn't all of who I was. And he knew that from the day he met me, actually. So it wasn't like a big shock to him. But
I
when
love
I
that, by the
neared,
way. Sorry to interject,
yeah,
but I feel like that's such an important part of your story. And I think it's something that probably a lot of people don't experience. For one, because I don't know that a lot of people enter relationships being that authentic and open about who you are. And you weren't even really like kind of out publicly in a lot of ways to people in your
right.
life, but you were comfortable with your ex-husband Craig and
Hmm.
as friends sharing all these things. And so something that just came across so wonderfully in the story is how that relationship between you two was so radically honest that it
Yeah,
allowed you to find that part of yourself and flourish in that.
it really did. Yeah, I feel really grateful that he has been such a support in terms of really teaching me that love looks like freedom. And that was sort of what our wedding vows were about. Um, we were together 21 years, married for 17, so quite a long time. And our vows really had to do with um, letting each other, supporting each other, and being the most free and authentic versions of ourselves. So if we were to stick to that, that's basically what we did in separating and in divorcing. Because as I approached 40, 41, it felt so toxic to me, even physically. And I get into some of that in my book, um, but definitely emotionally, spiritually, mentally, the invisibility of my queerness and living like a straight passing sort of life. Um, I felt like I wasn't closeted. I was like having to come out all the time because it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm married to this guy, but I'm also attracted to women and I'm not like living that life. And yeah, for me, there felt like there's momentum and a sense of urgency around like, I hope that in this lifetime I get to explore that aspect of myself because it is real, and I'm not sure how that's going to happen. And so I talked with Craig about that, and it was like, okay, maybe we try ethical non-monogamy and see if that is a route, to take. And maybe we just change the shape of how our relationship looks and see if that works. And we went really, really slowly with that over the course of years, working with a counselor who specializes in that, reading all those books, really doing that slowly and gently, and realized that that wasn't the tack to take for us, and it is for a lot of people. But I think just with my own attachment style and the way that he and I wanted a marriage to look, we were like, this isn't that, but we can be something else to each other. And um, so yeah, we're still really close, and we're co-parenting our teenager together. But for me, it's really allowed me the freedom to fill out, I think, this part of myself that hasn't gotten to be expressed, but I've always known was in there, even as a teenager. And gosh, what you just said about your teen years, I feel like, um, yeah, that's so important. I mean, I'm raising a teenager now, but like the task there is identity formation and really bouncing who we are off of our peers. That becomes so much more paramount than, parents at that point. So it's like, what are friends thinking and where are we socially and how do I fit into the world and into circles. And so a lot of people assimilate to, the social pressure, but it's like the conditioning and what's happening, and what the norm is. And it feels like hard to go against the inertia of that when you are young and your brain isn't fully formed and you're like, oh, well, this is the task and I need to be loved. And
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, it's like, love me, just
right,
like,
it's
let me
always loved
belong.
me. It still is.
Yeah. But
But at that
yeah,
age, yeah, it's so like I have a quote in my book from Bethany Webster where she says, for daughters growing up in a patriarchal culture, there's a sense of having to choose between being empowered and being loved. And like how, yeah, men are a lot of time, I know I'm speaking in a gendered way here and in a binary way, which I know is completely antiquated, but in the sense of like the conditioning and the time in which I grew up, it definitely was in
it's
a
relevant.
binary split.
Yeah.
Yeah, for my generation, for sure, it is, and I see that shifting, and I'm so freaking grateful for that.
I mean, one of
But
the things, oh, I'm sorry. I'm
yeah,
sorry. Go ahead.
no, that's okay. I was just gonna say, like the fact that we were raised for goodness and for to be loved and to be desired and to be wanted, not to want to desire to love, to like get those things. And here's how you perform to get it. Whereas, men being raised to for power. And it's like if we show our power, if we're vulnerable enough to be seen and to be visible in our full power, will we be loved? Will we belong? Sometimes the answer is no. So it's completely um, understandable to have that adaptive strategy, that survival strategy to just
Yeah.
be what is expected of us when we're younger, which we don't have to do anymore, thank God.
A couple of things that you said. I was going to make a comment first about how the way that you articulate the reality of a patriarchal society in a way that isn't like condemning and bitter, right? It's just factual.
Yeah,
It's just very much
right,
like this is the situation. It's not great. And we're
right.
trying to unravel that and create a better, more holistic society. But I do think it's very relevant. I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s, and so
Mm-hmm,
I have a very similar sense of that.
mm-hmm.
Um, like when I was called a lesbian in seventh grade, like people weren't coming out. Okay. They just
Right,
weren't. Like even
yeah.
when I was in college, I
Yeah,
say this to Nicole constantly. I'm like, where were all the girls that wanted to kiss girls when I wanted to kiss girls? Where were
I
they?
wonder the same thing
Because
about
they
my
were
college
there.
experience. Where were they? They weren't at my college either, but they probably were, and we just
Yeah,
weren't
they were,
talking to
but
each
nobody
other
wanted
about
to
it.
talk. Yeah, nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to do anything
Yep.
about it. And so it's like you kind of look at that too, and it's like we felt ousted or we felt like we didn't belong. But part of that, as I'm even just saying this to you right now, is like because we were aware of something that authentically existed within us and we felt that and we wanted to express that, but not everybody either was aware of the fact that they felt that or felt like they wanted to express it for whatever reason they did or didn't do it.
Mm-hmm,
And so and I was closeted. So like as many
mm-hmm,
people go through those things, you're like, how many other people were sharing that experience? And then you look at people like this ties into the other part of what I want to say about your daughter, who
mm-hmm,
handled the entire situation of your relationship with your ex-husband and the way your family was going to change and bringing somebody new into your lives. Like she just did that so gracefully. And as a
yeah.
13-year-old, we are the worst when we're 13.
I know.
Like,
Yeah, well, they're non-binary now.
I'm
But when
sorry.
I wrote the book, no, it's okay. When I wrote the book, they were using she, her pronouns, but have since come out as non-binary. So I'll use they, them today. And
Okay.
I talk about that in the
Thank
epilogue of
you.
my book because the rest was published, like finished, locked before I wrote the epilogue. But in the epilogue, I talk about that piece. Um, yeah, so they at the time, I mean, it really gave me a lot of hope for their generation of just being like so much more open to different relationship structures. Like they knew when we opened our marriage, I told them when I started dating my girlfriend Diana, who I'm still dating, there was some overlap there, and it was in the experimentation of open relationship. And they were like, "Oh, that's so cool! Like you are so truthful with each other, so you'll never cheat or have secrets." We're like, yeah, this seems like the best way for that. Well, I'm so proud of you, mom, that you get to express this part of yourself. And I was like, wow, I don't know that as a 13-year-old, when and where I grew up, that would have hit me
No,
in that way at
no,
all.
I would have panicked. Honestly, I feel like
Yeah.
I would have been like, what do you mean? What's happening right now? Like my life just exploded. But to your point, like we couldn't
Totally.
conceive of it, right? Like I think
Right.
there's something to be said for the way that it shows up now.
Yeah.
There is a lot to do with representation.
Hmm.
Something that I recognized honestly only really recently is how important that level of representation is because growing up, like there weren't shows with lesbians on them.
Right.
When I was in college, it was like the L word. We were like desperate for anything. You're like,
Totally.
these aren't realistic relationship dynamics, but we'll
No.
take it. And it's like
Yeah. And still
anything,
I'm like, oh, there's a lesbian in the show. I'm
a
gonna like
thousand
let's
percent.
watch. Totally.
We did a TikTok that went viral that was just absolutely ridiculous of us and a friend of ours walking down the street next to each other. So my wife and I walking together, and then her walking by and just like whispering to each other, like, I think she's a lesbian. And then we show a shot of our friend texting on her phone, being like, they were totally lesbians. And it's like, we recognize each other in the wild,
Yeah.
but
And you're
like,
just
we
like, you
don't
want to
do
give
shit
like the
about
secret
it.
handshake or just like, hi, me too. Yeah. And it's like I talk about this quite a bit in my book, just the invisibility of that for me, not just in the relationship that I was in, even now with my girlfriend, when I'm not walking hand in hand with her down the street, because I'm femme presenting, people assume I'm straight. And so there's that whole thing where it's like, should I be doing more to signal? What does that mean? Why
Yeah.
would I do that? Is that how I want to express myself? Like, I'm still going through this whole identity crisis of like, is the way I express currently a product of um, having like pandered to a male gaze unconsciously for my whole life, or is this my innate like way I want to express myself
Yeah.
visually? So it's really like I want to get super aligned there, and it's been shifting over the last few years, but not to the point of like I don't know. I mean, I feel like if I am queer, I look queer because that's what queer looks like, right? It doesn't,
Yeah.
there
Oh,
doesn't
I
have to
love
be,
that. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
like, why would I need to be, I don't know, signaling in other ways necessarily, but I feel the same way, when we walk around and I'm like, oh, yay, there's some other lesbians here. Yeah. Like it feels like you want to have that party reflected in the community
The
or in
recognition.
culture. Yeah, totally. And the invisibility of it having felt so painful for me the first half of my life. Yeah, really, right now it feels like I want to be more visible in that. And I feel like I really hope, but I doubt that my generation is the last one to have succumbed to compulsory heterosexuality. But
Well, would you
like, or
consider
even
yourself you'd be technically like
Gen,
Gen X, right? Because you were
I'm
born
Gen
in the
X
70s. Okay.
technically,
Okay. So
75. Yeah.
we're 10 years apart, but like I think
Okay.
that so I would refer to myself as an elder millennial. Um
Yeah.
and I feel very similarly. Like
Hmm.
I was I would always make the joke that there were like gay friended gay people and straight friended gay people, and I just had like all the straight friends. Like I was
Hmm.
like the friend. It wasn't trying to like seek community for the sake of just having that, or
Hmm.
I should rephrase that. I did, and I didn't find my people there. And so when
Right.
you talk about what queer looks like, I think it can be really hard when you are, even if you're not closeted, you can be out and you're just not in a place where, um, your people are also queer.
Right.
And so I struggled a lot with like, okay, well, I'm hanging out with these people because they're gay, and that's it. And I'm using
Hmm.
gay as like a broad stroke queer term,
Right.
but
Yeah.
like, um, and it's like just because we have this thing in common doesn't mean these are my people. And so it hasn't really been until my adult life that I've been able to feel a lot closer to queer people because we align in a lot of other different ways. But when I was in
Right.
college, it would be like a friend says to you, "Oh, I know somebody you should date. They're a lesbian," right? Like that's it. That's all
Like, and
you
that's the
have to
common
go
thing.
on.
Yeah, right. Yeah, as if like someone would say that to a straight person. Like
Yeah,
you would
I
be
know
like,
a
"Hey,
man. Like,
I know a man. You should date this person because
yeah.
he is
And
attracted to women."
yes.
Yeah.
And so I think that part of that visibility to your point is like even just seeing each other in the context of those circles is sometimes challenging because we especially I found that I came out pretty much entirely in college, but it was sort of a slow drip.
Hmm.
And as I got to this point where I would have a girlfriend, it was easier to talk about it because you could kind of frame the conversation around your relationship. You didn't have to come out as
Right.
overtly.
Yeah.
And then when I got married the first time, it was like you say wife and there's no discrepancy there. You could say girlfriend and
Hmm.
you get girlfriend or like girlfriend. And it's like,
Totally.
okay, great. Now I have to
Yeah.
explain that. So, you're
Yeah.
constantly trying to find the language and the representation, to your point, physically that feels right to you.
Hmm.
And my wife will refer to me as mask presenting. And I'm like, I don't really feel like that's like, I get what you're saying because I've got short
Hmm.
hair and I dress like a tomboy, which you
Hmm.
mentioned was kind of outdated. I'm like, I still refer to myself as that. But I think like it's like the
Yeah.
aesthetic is like my
My
tomboy
girlfriend does
aesthetic.
too. She's like, I'm
Yeah.
a tomboy.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, ah,
You're like, what
you're
does
a
it even
sporty
mean?
spice. Yeah,
Oh,
but
so,
what? Yeah.
but I think to your point, she's also very feminine presenting. And so
Hmm.
I think I'd be interested to hear when she listens to this, her thoughts on it, because I think she might be going through that a little bit. Like she's very beautiful and can pull off like dressing up, going out, looking like a 10 to go to a fancy event. And I would be
Right.
so proud to have her on my arm. And she can be in like yoga pants and a workout top. And I'm like, great, awesome. I actually prefer that probably, and
Right.
so it's like, do what feels right to you. And for
Yeah.
me, that is the short hair that took me
Hmm.
decades to actually commit to, because when I was little and I was made fun of for looking like a boy, I was like, no, we'll grow the hair out, right? We'll grow
Right.
the hair out.
Yeah.
I'll look more feminine. I'll date boys. I'll do this. I'll do that. And so
So
when I
now it's a
first,
reclamation. I love
yes,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, totally. I love that. And it's like, so when that happened, it was actually when my mom had passed away and I was like, fuck it, like get rid of the hair. I dyed it bright
Hmm.
red. It was like aggressive. And,
Hmm.
it was like the epitome of when somebody has a life crisis and then they get bangs, but it was like all the
Right.
things that happened. I
Yeah.
was like, I was going through a really bad divorce. My
Mhm.
mom died. I was like, take it high and tight and make it as red as possible. We're going to make
Right.
it known. Nobody's going to ask me what went wrong. They're just going to look and they're going to know.
Yeah.
Um,
Like, oh, honey, are you
yeah,
okay?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%. But like,
Hmm.
I think to your point, do you feel like there's been in your coming out journey, uh, also the process of identifying like the parts of yourself that have felt right to you throughout your life that you're shedding, that maybe are also like coming back in parts, like as you're identifying more clearly like what you, as you said, sort of like what you want to hold on to and what you want to
Yeah.
release.
Yeah. I think that it's a process of remembering in some way who I was to begin with. Like even the little kid of me was pretty wise about who she was. And then I think growing up in the family that I grew up in, who were wonderful people, but I always felt very different from them in a lot of ways, spiritually, politically. Like there are a lot of differences, and I recognized that pretty early on. And I think that I was socialized out of being some of the parts of myself, because of that need to belong and be loved. And it's a survival need, really, for a kid to be like, these are the people that take care of me, and I need that to happen. So I will
Yeah.
be this perfect daughter, and I will get straight A's, and I will date this guy, and I will do all the things. Um, yeah, but now it does feel more like, okay, the parts of me that I felt like were weird or that had to go underground are actually my magic. Like those are the parts that are me. And those are the parts that I've been slowly reclaiming in my all of my adult life. I'd say after college, college was like a awful time for me actually in my life. And I talk about that a bit in my book, but I felt pretty lost there. But I think after undergraduate, especially when I started my graduate program in my late 20s, at Naropa University, which is a Buddhist oriented school for transpersonal counseling and for art therapy. And I met my people, like I met other people there who reflected these parts of me back to myself, the type of spirituality that feels important to me. And, just different ways of looking at things sociopolitically. And I started to realize like these aren't wrong or bad. These are actually ways I want to express in the world, and have been feeling more into that, as I've gotten older and older. So I feel like I'm becoming weirder, and I
I know.
use
I
that
love
term
that though.
endearingly because I love weird people, and I just think I think those are the parts of us that make us like you said before, like that magnetize others to us when we can be our fullest self and we're very comfortable that way, even in how we're presenting. Like you said with your wife, wearing yoga pants and, a workout top or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I prefer that. But there's something in me similarly with other people, and I can tell that they're at ease with themselves and they're just being themselves and they're not trying to necessarily fit into some mold or to mask parts of them that they might have felt shame for. And that's the valid thing to do. And I'm not saying that I don't, I'm not above that, because it's like an ongoing process of becoming and unmasking and unfolding. But I find that super attractive. Like when I feel that in another person, that they are just being who they are unapologetically. Um, yeah. And like, same like with my girlfriend, um, she's more like, I mean, she's not super femme or super man. She's just like more sporty-ish. But
Yeah,
I can
yeah,
tell
yeah,
when
yeah.
she's just like being her with like the backwards hat and I'm just like, oh, you're radiating yourself today. And that is just magnetic and attractive. And I can tell when that's happening. It's like, there you are. That feels really, really good, to see that in other people. So
Well,
yeah, trying to
something,
find that point of myself too.
yeah, well, something that you said in the book too, well, not even that you said, but the part of the book where you and your girlfriend were just kind of meeting each other and
Mhm.
recognizing that your souls were connecting in some way.
Mhm.
I had such a visual in my head of that moment for you too. Um, because the words that you both said to each other were like, I want to know you. And
Yeah.
it hit so much because when Nicole and I met, she had listened to the podcast. We'd met online. I From the get, we were like, we'll be friends, whatever kind of thing.
Mhm.
There was no intended interest. And she said after listening to the podcast, she's like, I just knew I had to know you. And so when you
Mm.
had written that and I got to that point in the book, I just felt such a deep connection to that. And when you just made this statement, when you look at your girlfriend and you have this moment of like, you're radiating yourself, like you are being who
Mhm.
you are. And that is what I love about you. And that is who I want to see. Because when you have those moments where you question yourself in life, you question, like you said, you're weird. Um,
Mhm.
I've had such a similar experience in embracing that. And this was another quote that I pulled, again, paraphrasing, but you'd said that a big part of the gift that you have to offer, sorry, has to do with your high bandwidth for authentic connection. And that when you give that gift from your attachment wound with fear of abandonment, you experience it as grasping and then you shame yourself for grasping. Most
Mhm.
relatable thing I've ever read in my life. Like I just was like,
Yeah.
oh, because I will tell Nicole, I'm like, I was so desperate. Like I
Yeah.
just so desperately wanted people to love me the way that I loved them. And then what you finish that quote with is, when I offer this gift in a clean and radiant way, I find that I'm met with deep and satisfying connections. And it is so spot on, Jen. It's like we are so
Mhm.
worried that somebody's going to see us and not like us that we hold back. And then what we realize is when we give space to those parts of ourselves that are so true to ourselves, that people are really seeing you fully for the first time. And that is such a revelatory thing to experience, and such a, for me, such a moment of gratitude in recognition of myself, to be able to be like, I don't have to carry the shame that my younger self convinced me I needed to carry. I get to be who I am, and I get to be appreciated for who I am by others. And by way of that, recognize that I can and should appreciate myself.
Yes. Oh, well said. Very much so. Like that's something that I work with. I've been working with it constantly, and I still feel like, um, with my attachment style, like insecure, anxious attachment, and like I think that some of that fear of abandonment that lives in me from my own history, I do tend to, offer myself like I'm the gatherer of my friends. I'm like someone who likes to organize things like that and to have one-on-one connections with people that are deep and real and not. I don't have a huge tolerance for like a lot of small talk. I feel like I got my fill of that as a kid. So I'm like, no, let's just go there. Like I want, and there is a part of me that is, I recognize that it was maybe built out of that wound and may still come from that wound in some way. But as long as I'm conscious of the wound and I'm conscious of that happening, there's a consciousness thing that I think is the healing key there. It's like this can happen and I can understand why it might be happening that way, but to know that helps it to happen less and less out of the wound and just really be giving from this place or expressing, and not even giving, but expressing from this place of like all of that's true, yes, and let me also show you the wound part because that's part of who I am too, and that also needs to be loved up. Like that isn't,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's like, and then it's really vulnerable to be seen in our fullest expression that way, because it's like the parts that we might have covered up if we were being less authentic. But I think that the places where we feel the most alone are really where we connect the most deeply when we are brave enough to do that in a safe space. Like it's not like everyone necessarily gets that part of us. It might not feel safe, right? But when we gauge it and it's a relationship where you feel safe and you can dare to make those parts seen, I have been pleasantly surprised in those conversations and those connections that that is where, um, I've been most afraid maybe or have had the most shame. And when I say that, other people, it allows them to say the parts that maybe that they've kept in the dark because shame can't really exist in the light. And it's like, oh, that's where we find the most connection or the deepest connection. Um, but it takes this courage to like get there, I think, with someone. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm practicing. I don't know if it's, I mean, it's just, it's constantly practicing. That's how
Yeah.
I'll say it. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I appreciate also just how intentional you are about making it known that you are, as we all are, a work in progress, right?
of
We
course.
can only live life with the information that we have now. And
Yeah,
I do think that when you are growing up and you've built all these expectations, and now you're at this point in life where you're feeling challenged to live life honestly and with integrity for yourself above all else, um, it creates a bit of chaos. And something that you share in your book, you lean into astrology at various points in the
hmm,
book, which I really appreciate because I will say historically was something that I didn't really pay much attention to. Like for like, I don't really, it never came up, didn't really interest me, didn't
yeah,
really have to pay attention to it. Right. And what I really love is as I've gotten into the astrology more over the last few years, and just not even astrology, spirituality overall,
hmm,
I see so much connectivity in the way that, we show up in the world and the things that are happening around us. And so can you share a little bit about how that factored into your experience, whether while writing the book or just kind of overall?
yeah, totally. Yeah, astrology is one of those things that I think made me weird as a kid. I would like study it from the time I was 11. My family was like, "What is this woo woo?" Like what are you talking about? So I'm not an astrologer. I don't ever proclaim to be, but it is a big part of my book because for gosh, I guess ever since 2005, I've been seeing the same astrologer that I talk about in my book. His name's Eric Myers, and he's amazing. And when I was approaching my 42nd birthday, I was at this place of feeling that urgency we talked about earlier of like, I need more truth and grit and depth, and I need to express more of myself. I feel like there's a part of me that I am not able to express in the current like shape of my life, and I need that to come out. It felt like the magma brewing. I use a lot of volcano metaphor in my book, but it was like underneath and I needed to come out and be lava maybe. But I was feeling all of that and it felt like such turmoil, and he just listened to me smiling, and then he was like, oh, you're right on time, like this is so perfect. If I were writing a book about the Uranus opposition, you would be my case study. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, that's what astrologers call the midlife crisis. Basically, it's around your 42nd birthday. And I was doing like my 42nd birthday reading. I see him every year around my birthday for like, what's coming this year sort
Yeah,
of
yeah.
reading. And it's the time when the planet Uranus is like halfway across the zodiac from the time it was at your birth. And the planet Uranus is about like rebellion and freedom and about calling you on your bullshit and having anything come to light that hasn't been expressed yet. So anything you're repressing, there's this urge around the Uranus opposition in astrology to expose it, to have it emerge, right? So he was like, this is an emergence. This is what, I don't think he used that word, but it was what the Uranus opposition is about. And it's in service of like a higher awareness or a higher connection to like the higher self, and to find like true inner freedom, to try to find like sovereignty, and self agency around what it is you want to do in the second half of life. So he's like, here's your opportunity. Um, to do that. And I was like, sobbing in the session. And
Well, you
he's
got the
just like,
green light.
congratulations. Yeah. And I did. And that felt so validating. He's like, you're exactly where you need to be. Like, this is what's happening. So that felt really just interesting to learn that, just to be like, oh, like what is I'm feeling in here and down here on earth is like reflected somehow there in my chart. That just felt really interesting. And some people connect with that in my book, some people don't, but it's part of my story and how I felt validated and, you're right, like greenlit to move forward with the things that I was um, really wanting to express and explore. And a way that I bring that into the book is talking about the lunar nodes. And I don't have to get all into that here, but it's the north and south node in everyone's chart, what you're moving toward and what your comfort zone is, and then what, would be like the highest aim of your chart. And so my north node, what I'm moving into are a lot of like is Scorpio. So it's a lot of scorpionic things that are, around sexual expression and around writing and around sharing things that are more subversive or edgy or woo woo or witchy or all of these things that felt like my weird stuff. I was like, oh, so it's about making those visible and teaching those, and being kind of a stand for those. And that has felt scary to me in the past in a lot of ways, where I don't know if it's just persecution fear that's like ancient, that's in my blood and bones of like, oh, if I stand up in my queerness and my witchiness, I will be somehow, burned at the stake
Ostracized.
or
Yeah.
right. Yeah. And now it's like I've gotten to a point of where it's not even a choice in me to whether or not to express that. It's just like, this is what needs to happen next, in order for my own evolution and to just be how I want to be in the world, and to be modeling that for my kid, and but just modeling the living by truth. And I think well, that's kind of a whole other conversation, not
Well,
astrology, but
well, I
um,
mean, feel free to go that direction too. I mean, one of the things that I think is really powerful in the book is speaking to your relationship dynamic with your family and with your parents. There were parts where you are kind of outlining on is the wrong way to say it. But you're detailing conversations or experiences you had with your mom,
mhm,
and sort of, as you were saying, things that you grew up thinking, or expectations that you were raised with, and trying to challenge those now and really step into who you are. I understand that. Like my mom, before she passed away, um, she and I were really similar, but we were also like head butt because of that. And then the
yeah,
things that we differed on, I had very similar conversations with my mother about like my own coming out, and the way that you speak about how she's such a kind, compassionate person,
mhm,
and you're seeking that from your primary caregiver.
mhm,
And it's like, that they're capable of giving it, but what can be really hard in those moments, in my experience, and what I think you were saying in the book based on my interpretation of it, is that like it kind of pulls you a little bit away from that authentic self in those conversations, because you want to hold space for yourself and honor yourself, but you also have to navigate somebody else's discomfort, or,
yeah,
and I say have to, you don't have to. We
right,
tend to, we're conditioned to. And I think with
mhm,
that with my mom's a baby boomer. And so it's like with that generation, it's like there was so much of like, this is how it's done. This is what you do.
mhm,
And whether
yeah,
that was
my
sexuality
mom
or
too,
otherwise.
right,
And so when you challenge their perspective on things with your own existence, that can be a really daunting experience. Can you share a little bit about like what that was like for you, and how that kind of permeates throughout your relationship even now?
sure, yeah. This is the part that kept me up at night the most, I think, writing my book. I mean, yeah, I talked about my marriage and sexuality, all of these things pretty explicitly, but the piece with my mom was Yeah, it's a lot. I wanted to keep it true to my experience. This is one of the hardest parts about writing a memoir is that, I'm telling it from my perspective, and her perspective is clearly different because she's a totally different human than I am. And, when you write a memoir, it's like the people in your closest spheres are the people you're writing about, but really writing through my own lens. And I wanted to be respectful, um, and I wanted to be objective in a sense, but there's no way of being fully objective when you're telling it through your own voice. And I feel like the situation with me, for those who haven't read my book, it's I came out to my mom, gosh, in my early 20s, but I was already dating Craig, the man I married eventually, and was like, yeah, I'm attracted to women as well. And it was like said in passing, and I almost just sort of said it and then it was like, oh shit, I just said that. And then got quiet and waited. And then she was like, oh, well, at least you have Craig. So that's not going to be a problem, was like the response. So I felt like crush immediately, like, oh, okay. So that doesn't mean anything. Or it, just wasn't seen, wasn't acknowledged. And I think there were about five of those instances between my early 20s and early 40s, where I would like put that out there. And then it was like, just seen as like, well, that doesn't matter. And
It
then
wasn't really received.
yeah, it definitely wasn't received. And I think, she heard what she wanted to hear. And when we talk about it now, she has a different perspective of like, oh, I thought you were saying that you were okay with people, being attracted to whoever they wanted to. And I was like, no, I was really saying I am attracted. Like those are the words I said. But I wasn't living that life. So in a sense, it was like your sexuality doesn't matter because your life looks like this. And I realized the privilege in my life looking like, hetero passing as it did. And the invisibility of it too. Like I said, that was just really hurtful to me, especially when I'm blatantly expressing it. So I think, yeah, my mom's also a baby boomer and has a lot of, this is the way things are. And so when Craig and I made the choice to separate, I wrote my mom a letter and I asked her to just take time with it. And because I didn't want it to be a conversation, in real time necessarily, um, because I wanted her to digest it. I realized it would hit her in a way that, it was a lot that she wasn't expecting at once. And I was really trying to have compassion for the fact that she would need some time to process it and I was trying to protect my own energy in that way of, I didn't necessarily want to receive back whatever the first reactionary
I
responses might
totally
be.
understand that. I left a note in my parents' door
Wow. Yeah.
when I couldn't have a conversation with them because it was too many knockdown, drag out conversations where it was
Mm,
like, I don't feel like having to explain myself and be interrupted by it. So, like, you need to hear what I have to say, consume what I have to say, and then
hmm
come back and have a conversation with me. So, that was like when I tell you that there's so much that's relatable in your story, I was like, oh man, that hits home. Cause like the
Yeah.
way you described it was exactly how I felt.
Wow. Yeah. I think it's kind of kind to both parties, right? Like to yourself to know that that person can go have their experience and process what they need to, and then we can have a conversation. And, to them to be able to sit with it for a while and
And
talk
like you
to who
said,
they need to talk to.
protect your
Protect my,
energy. Like that's
yeah.
so important.
It is. I didn't feel like I was available at that point to explain or defend. I had been going through so much over those years with Craig and really trying to figure ourselves out within our marriage that it wasn't like, and now I'm open to opinions. It was like, this is what's going to happen. Um, so yeah, I felt like I needed to protect that. And the way things are now it's interesting how, yeah, like books are just a snapshot in time. So it's like preserved where it was. And I wrote most of this book in 2020, 2021. But we're continuing to have those conversations. And I won't say that it's like perfect at all, but it is progressing. And I think that she is hearing me more and hearing where I am hurt by and have been hurt by the lack of recognition. So I think that it's an ongoing process, but my book, I was hoping for it to be a bridge and an invitation to her to deepen our relationship and have her get to know me, like really me, and not necessarily the me that um, I was like raised to be, like, all of the expectation things that I met, great. But like that's not who I fully am. And I want to have a relationship with her where I'm getting to be my full self and that she is too. And so that's the part too, like you were saying, like leaving room for them, to have, to be who they are, like to, like we don't have to necessarily make them comfortable, make other people comfortable, but in out of love and respect and appreciation for, the person my mom is, who has the hugest heart of anyone I know. I want to leave her space to be and say, be who she is and say what she needs to say as well. So yeah, it's ongoing and it's hard not to take some of it personally. Yeah, especially when it's political, because to me the political is
Oh, I
personal, to
know
her it's
that one.
not. Like there's a whole lot there. We could unpack that forever, but I feel like it's on a good trajectory, and I think that initially it was harder. She read the book before it was published, when it had gone through its last round of editing, so I knew I couldn't change it anymore. But I also, it was before other people could read it, so I did that intentionally so that I wouldn't be tempted to change things, based on how they were received. So
I respect that
I
and I
think,
appreciate that.
yeah, it was tough. I lost a lot of sleep in that period of time of like giving my mom the book and waiting for her to read it. And she's like, "Oh, I haven't had a lot of time yet." And I'm like, "Can you just finish it so I can sleep?" And she's like, "Wait, why are you losing sleep?" I'm like, "Why don't you read it and we'll talk?"
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's good. I'm about to go visit them and hopefully have some in-person conversations, about some of it as well. So
I
it's
recommend it. Like if the opportunity is there to take it, I feel like just knowing what I do know about you through your story and the other interactions that we've had, that you probably would take that opportunity. But something I'll say that like right before the last time I saw my mom in person, I was at my sister's also during COVID. So like our timelines in terms of like big life changes blowing shit up in our lives, very similar also.
wow, interesting.
Um, and so I was at my sister's and talking to my parents about like this really bad situation with my ex. And my mom had said to me, like, I don't understand like why you felt you couldn't talk to us about this.
Right. Yeah.
And I had to explain as much as I could from a place of compassion. And thankfully, I'd been doing a lot of therapy. So I was in a good place to
Hmm.
have this discussion. And I cannot emphasize enough the importance of having it before she passed away, because I was able to say, well, because when I came out to you guys, it was very much about how you responded to it. It wasn't about
Hmm.
what I was experiencing or what it took for me to go to that place. And so
Right.
the point in the book where you reference your mom taking out a yellow legal pad, I kid you not that when I came out to my parents,
That was our sex talk. It's hilarious.
my mom had a yellow legal pad the next day and was like, these are the things that we're concerned about. And I was like, what is happening right now? So I was like, okay, so maybe
Oh,
is that, I was like, do all the boomer moms just carry around yellow
they're just
legal
like,
pads?
okay,
We
let's
have
chart
things to
this.
discuss. Hold, please.
Right.
But and I think that having that moment of like, okay, I'm an adult and I need to say what I need to say, but you're
Hmm.
battling that inner child and you're being like, I don't want to say this thing that's going to upset my parent or create tension or whatever. And it's like, but if you don't do that, if we focus too much on their comfort or discomfort, then we exist in a perpetual state of discomfort. And that's no
Right.
way to live. And I'm like, why do I always have to be the one that's uncomfortable? So like
Right.
I think that it's great that you'll be seeing them in person, because I do think having the in-person interaction, I think being able to share space and energy with people for those conversations is extremely important. You can have it over
Yeah.
the phone or FaceTime, and that's better than nothing. But I do
Right.
think there's something to be said for being able to hug somebody after or
Totally.
during or whatever it is, and give
Yeah.
that space in like the actual context of where you're sitting and discussing it.
I agree. Like it brings that level of humanness and the reminder of like, above all, we love each other and we're family. And um, we can talk about these things and get to know each other as people. Like I want my mom
Yes.
to know me as an adult. And like you said, like I don't necessarily need to make myself smaller or hide parts of myself to make her comfortable. Um, but that's been the pattern, I think, of just like, and I think it's a typical pattern of children trying to not rock the boat or make their parents uncomfortable, since the parents are the ones who are providing or caregiving or that we depend on, like I said, as children. So I think that it's just like coming into adult relationship, and we've done it over and over, I think, in my adult life, but this is another level, and it's a harder one, I think, in a lot of ways, because it does challenge a lot of parts of her, a lot of beliefs in her, and as well as like, mom not wanting things to be hard for her kid.
Oh, that was, yeah, for
And
sure.
yeah, and I think that in her head, that's what that is. And I think in her generation, that would have been a lot harder. Um, Not to say it's not hard now, clearly, but it's
It's just, it's different. It's the societal dynamic is extremely, extremely different. Like they're
it is.
the the dialogue is unfortunately really similar in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
as we were talking about, like the socio-political side of it. But if you look at the comfort level that people have in expressing themselves, the ability that we have to connect with other people in person or virtually, like I do think
Yeah,
that as detrimental as like being online all the time can be in a lot of ways, it's also bred a sense of community for people who haven't felt
totally.
seen historically. And
Hmm.
so I think that part of what our parents miss in their generation is they're not getting all of that by
Right.
design. They're actively probably like, I don't need to deal with that, and that's okay. But
Totally.
don't act like it doesn't exist or it's not relevant or important.
Right. Yeah. And I don't think like my parents have a direct experience of that. But when I look at like social media and having a 16-year-old, and I think, well, oh, should I limit that or not? I mean, that provided them, especially during the pandemic and being a teenager in the pandemic, who wasn't able to get together with friends, who wasn't able to have sleepovers. It's like, and who's queer and who's non-binary, like a way of seeing themselves expressed or seeing themselves mirrored back to them that in a
Yeah.
way that I didn't have access to as a teenager. That would have been amazing. So I feel like
It's
it's
amazing
an
now to
important,
me. Like I
yeah,
feel
yeah,
grateful for
me
that
too.
now.
Me too. Me too. I mean, as much as, you was saying like some people, of course, like put on their best face, for social media, and or like, and this is how it was, and ta-da, it worked out, like that sort of thing. I feel like that's changing too in a lot of senses, and I am grateful for that. Like, and I think that the more real people can be, and the more like exposing of the parts that feel safe for them to expose are helpful in other people connecting in that way. And the visibility of, having other queer people or other just whatever version of what part of you needs to emerge or what needs to come out, having that visible as much as feels safe can be so healing for other people who are viewing it. And yeah, it just really feels like part of why I wanted to even put this book into the world is like find those parts of themselves in it somewhere and be able to feel validated or seen or less shame around whatever part ended up touching them. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So I know that we're kind of coming up on time here. So I'd love to just kind of
sure.
ask one more question.
Yeah.
So you've obviously you've put your book out here. It's relatively recent release. It's done
Hmm.
very well. Kudos on just like hitting number one on Amazon in a variety of categories. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
And just real quick before I go into the last question, I do want to say, based on what you just said, like hopefully helping release some of that shame. I can say from a personal perspective, like 100%, it helped do that. And it's helping me process those things and think about it differently and really understand and dig into those parts of myself that like you've said sort of throughout the conversation in the book, you recognize that you need to do something about it, but it's not always like I'm in the place where I'm ready to do that. And right now I am. And
Yeah.
so it has, even just in the fleeting moments since consuming your book and getting into this conversation, it's really given me a sense of grounding in myself and recognition that the things that I am afraid of or feeling shame around are things that I can work through and conquer and
Mm.
heal. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing your story so vulnerably, and truly the way that you write is really beautiful. Um you said earlier about sort of the metaphors with the volcanoes, but it just throughout you really speckle the book with your personality, and your language choice is just really spot on and spoke to me in a really deeply personal way.
Thank you, Nikki. Thanks so much for saying that. I really, yeah, I love hearing from people who are reading it and just hearing what they are getting from it. And it helps me to have that sort of a mirror to know what it is I'm transmitting, so I appreciate. those
Yeah,
words. And I appreciate you
absolutely.
interviewing me here.
Well, thank you. And so, so you've got this book out there. I cannot rave about it enough if you can't tell throughout the entire episode. But
Mm.
what is next on your list, and where are you going from here now that you've published the book? Are you looking to continue kind of your authoring career or building out your practice? What's on your agenda?
Wow. Yeah. Right now, I am working as a midlife coach. I see people one-on-one, and I also facilitate groups. So I have, some programs that are ongoing. I also have some that are evergreen or self-paced programs
Mhm.
online that are kind of different themes from the book. There's one that's called queer emergence, one that's witch emergence, that's soul emergence. So there's some fun things that people can get into. All of that's on my website, which is just my name, jenberlingo.com. So I'm always doing I'm seeing what's next, because like I said, the book is a snapshot in time, but I'm still growing with it. I'm still unfolding and unfurling and evolving in that way, and seeing where it wants to take my work next and where I'm called. But this is still feeling really alive and juicy. So that is what I'm offering right now. And just I definitely want to keep writing. Writing is something that I've done since I was little, and I've wanted to publish a book since I was like 3. So I'm still kind of in shock that happened. And I'd love to do it again. So I have a few ideas brewing, and I have not felt the pause enough yet to sit quietly and write. But I'm hoping that comes again. And I'm feeling the pull back into making more visual art as well. Because I think while the book was being edited and produced and published, a lot of my artistic expression really was aiming toward, writing more so
Definitely.
than painting. And my art studio is beckoning me upstairs here. Like I
I
really
love
want to
it.
do that.
Yeah, that's
Thanks.
awesome. Well, and I really appreciate that you have so many modalities that you can use to help express yourself, because as you said in the fact that this is a teaching memoir, you're giving people opportunities to sort of question and invite ourselves into these areas of our lives or different practices that we might not consider otherwise. And I
Right.
know coming away from it, that's something that I hope other people really take in and practice as they're going through your book. Even with the audiobook, I think it's great because you can just pause it, like write down the prompt and
Yeah,
go through those exercises. And I think it really, you're offering people you're not only inviting them in, but you're giving them, the space, and you can self-pace that part of it too, which I think is really beautiful.
totally. Yeah. I really hope people will engage with it, wherever they feel comfortable, and maybe even a hair beyond their comfort zone. Just
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I hope that it's growth producing in some way.
Absolutely. Well, Jen, thank you so much for joining. And you mentioned people can find out more about you at jenberlingo.com, but is there anywhere else you want them to follow along?
Sure. I am on social media. I hang out on Instagram probably more than other um, social media outlets. So I'm at Jen Berlingo there. But I'm also on TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, all of those places.
We'll
But
add them all in the show
um,
notes.
yeah, they're all there in the show notes. And yeah, I think that's about it. My book is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook on Amazon, and it's available basically anywhere online wherever books are sold, or you can ask your indie bookstores to order it, which is an awesome way of
Yes.
supporting them as well.
Yeah, that's
So,
actually a really great idea. I appreciate you saying that. My mom was a big supporter of small bookshops. And in my hometown,
awesome.
there's a really great one. So next time I visit, I'll see if we can get it in there.
Oh, good. Thank you.
If they don't already have it, what would be amazing is if they already had
That
it.
would be cool. That would be
I'll let
very
you
cool.
know.
Please do.
Je-
Yeah, that would be great.
oh my gosh, Jen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Nikki. And I also want to say, thank you for sharing the parts of your story and pieces around your mom and your coming out. Like, that is so helpful for me and touching for me. So I'm glad it was like a two-way conversation. And that felt really, really wonderful to not just be like, hot seat, like, tell me all your stuff. Like, it was a really good interview in that way. So thanks, Nikki.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that the group of people that came together have come together and put
Me
us in
too.
each other's paths. Gang, that's all for this episode of Who the Fuck. We'll catch you on the flip side. Thanks for listening to Who the Fuck. And if you like what you hear, share the show with your friends, family, coworkers, or anyone else you think needs a healthy dose of introspection and raw authenticity. Feel free to rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. It's always appreciated. And you can also visit whothefck.com to check out more content,
Plus, you can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at whothefck_pod to keep up to date with what's new in my world and for exclusive bonus content. Catch you on the flip side.